Picture this: 1993, crowded Bombay streets, cigarette smoke thick in the air. A man selling tobacco from his tiny shop, calloused hands, worn clothes, completely unremarkable. His name was Nisargadatta Maharaj, and he was about to stumble upon something that would demolish everything we think we know about consciousness. When his guru whispered those fateful words, "Focus your attention on the sense of I am and stay with it," neither man could have predicted the philosophical earthquake that would follow. This wasn't meditation or mysticism. This was surgical precision applied to the very foundation of human experience. What Nisargadatta discovered in his humble shop would later strip away every spiritual pretense, every comfortable assumption about identity. His insights cut so deep that they revealed something shocking. The observer you think you are, that sense of I am you cling to, neither is actually you. How can paying attention to something so basic reveal such devastating truths about consciousness? The answer transforms everything you believe about your own existence. You know what's fascinating about that tobacco seller from Bombay? The most radical thing Nisargadatta ever said wasn't about transcending the ego, it was about transcending the very thing most spiritual seekers desperately cling to as their ultimate identity, the observer. I need to be honest with you about something. For years I thought I had it figured out. I'd sit in meditation, watching my thoughts come and go, feeling that profound sense of peace that comes from identifying as pure awareness. I am the witness, I'd tell myself. I am the one who watches but is never touched by what I observe. It felt so clean, so spiritual, so evolved. And that's exactly the problem. Here's what Nisargadatta understood that most spiritual teachers won't tell you. The witness is the most seductive trap on the entire spiritual path. It's like upgrading from a prison cell to a penthouse suite. You're still imprisoned, but now the cage is so beautiful you don't want to leave. Think about how appealing witness consciousness feels. When you identify as the observer, you get to feel spiritually superior to all those unconscious people caught up in their dramas. You get to maintain a sense of self while claiming to be beyond the self. You get to be someone, the enlightened witness, while pretending you're no one. It's the ego's final, most brilliant disguise. Nisargadatta saw right through this spiritual materialism. He said something that still gives me chills. The witness is both unreal and real. The last remnant of the illusion, the first touch of the real. Do you understand what he's pointing to here? The witness is like the morning star. It appears to be the brightest light in the sky until the sun rises and reveals it was just another celestial object. I watched this play out in meditation communities for decades. Sincere seekers would replace their identification with their thoughts and emotions with identification as the witness of thoughts and emotions. They'd trade "I am angry" for "I observe anger arising." They'd exchange "I am confused" for "I witness confusion in awareness." Same prison, different bars. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Even the statement "I am the witness" creates the fundamental duality that keeps you trapped. There's an I, there's the witnessing, and there's whatever is being witnessed. Three things: subject, process, object. The very structure of witness consciousness maintains the illusion of separation that spiritual practice is supposed to dissolve. Nisargadatta would hammer this point relentlessly with his visitors. Someone would come to him proud of their witnessing abilities, describing how they could observe their mind without getting caught up in it. His response was always the same devastating question: who is aware of the witness? This question destroys everything. If you can be aware of in yourself as the witness, then clearly there's something beyond the witness that's doing the being aware. So what is that? You try to make that into another witness, and the same problem arises. You try to make it into pure awareness, and you're back to making yourself into a thing, an identity, a someone. The psychological mechanism that keeps us attached to observer identity is brilliant in its simplicity. The witness feels like progress because it's partially true. Witnessing does happen. Awareness is present. The mistake is in making awareness into your identity, in claiming ownership of what's actually an impersonal process. Watch what happens in your own experience. Right now, sounds are being heard, but can you actually find a hearer? Thoughts are arising and passing away, but where is this thinker you imagine yourself to be? Seeing is occurring, but when you look for the seer, What do you actually find? This is where the fear kicks in, and I understand it completely. If I'm not the observer, not the witness, not the one who's aware, then what am I? The mind starts scrambling, trying to find something, anything, to be, because the alternative feels like annihilation. But here's what Nisargadatta discovered in that Bombay apartment above his cigarette shop. The fear of not being someone is just another movement in awareness. The one who's afraid of losing their identity as the witness is just another appearance, another wave in the ocean trying to convince itself it's separate from the water. I see this constantly in meditation retreats and spiritual communities. People sit for hours, proud of their ability to witness their experience without reaction. They've learned to observe their breath, their body sensations, their emotional states. They feel like they're making real progress, and in one sense they are. But they're also constructing a new, more subtle form of spiritual ego. The witness identity feels so convincing because it seems to solve the problem of suffering while maintaining a sense of self. You get to keep being someone, the enlightened observer, while claiming freedom from identification. It's like having your cake and eating it too, spiritually speaking. But here's where everything I'm sharing connects to something much larger. The insights I'm discussing come from years of studying not just Nisargadatta, but the entire tradition of radical non-dual understanding that traces back to ancient Hermetic principles. If you're ready for teachings that go even deeper than what's possible to share publicly, I need to tell you about something extraordinary. The Insights Academy has compiled the most complete version of the Kybalion ever assembled, knowledge so transformative that most platforms won't even allow it to be discussed. You can access this for free, but only if you're genuinely ready to have every spiritual assumption you've ever held completely dismantled. What makes the witness trap so insidious is how it mimics genuine freedom. When you're identified as the observer, you feel spacious, peaceful, detached from the drama of life. But this detachment is still a position, still a stance, still a way of being someone in relationship to experience. Real freedom isn't about finding the right identity, even a witnessing identity. It's about the recognition that all identity is a movement within what you actually are. The witness appears and disappears just like thoughts, emotions, and sensations. It's not what you are, it's something that happens within what you are. And this brings us to an even more shocking recognition, one that will completely shatter everything you think you know about your spiritual journey. If the witness is just another appearance, if the observer is just another object in awareness, then what about the most sacred identity of all? The I Am itself. Because that, my friend, is where Nisargadatta's teaching becomes truly dangerous to every spiritual concept you've ever cherished. If you thought questioning the observer was radical, what I'm about to share will seem absolutely impossible to your mind. Because we're about to challenge the one thing that every spiritual tradition, every meditation teacher, every enlightenment seeker holds as the ultimate truth, the sense of I Am itself. Most spiritual paths lead you to this pure sense of being. You start by disidentifying from thoughts, emotions, the body, roles, relationships, all the I am this and I am that identifications. Eventually you arrive at the pristine awareness of simply existing, the pure I am without any qualifications. This feels like coming home. This feels like the end of seeking. And for most people, it island. But Nisargadatta took seekers to a place that defied everything they thought they knew about consciousness itself. He would look at someone resting in that beautiful I Am presence and essentially say, "This too must go." The tobacco seller from Bombay understood something that sounds like madness to the spiritual mind. Even this pure sense of being, this consciousness that feels so fundamental, so eternal, it's temporary. It appears and disappears. And if it appears and disappears, it cannot be what you truly are. Listen to how he expressed this seemingly impossible teaching. Immortality is to free oneself from the sensation of I am, but it is not to disappear. On the contrary, it is an infinitely more real, conscious, and full state than you can imagine. Read that again. He's saying that immortality, true immortality, requires freeing yourself from the very sensation of existing. Not from the ego, not from personal identity, but from the root sensation of being itself. And yet, this isn't disappearing into nothingness. It's discovering something infinitely more real than anything consciousness can experience. Your mind is probably reeling right now. How can there be something beyond consciousness? How can there be something more real than the sense of existing? This is where we encounter the absolute limit of human comprehension, because what Nisargadatta pointed to cannot be grasped by consciousness. It can only be recognized as what you already are. Think about it this way. You know you exist, right? There's this undeniable sense of being present, aware, alive. But have you ever asked yourself, what is aware of this sense of being? What knows that you exist? There's something that recognizes even your most fundamental sense of I am, and that something cannot itself be the I am. Nisargadatta called the I am the primary concept, the root of all manifestation. It's like the first movement in absolute stillness, the first ripple in perfect calm. From this primary sense of being, the entire universe unfolds. Time begins, space appears, all experience becomes possible. But a concept, even the most fundamental concept, is still within the realm of the known, the experienced, the temporary. He would often use the analogy of deep sleep. In deep sleep, where is your precious I am? Where is consciousness? Where is the sense of existing? Gone, completely absent. Yet something remains, because you wake up and know you slept peacefully. Something was there throughout the absence of consciousness, something that doesn't depend on the sense of being for its existence. This is what he meant by the absolute, not as another spiritual concept, but as what you are before consciousness arises, during consciousness, and after consciousness dissolves. It has no attributes because attributes require consciousness to perceive them. It has no experience because experience requires the subject-object duality that consciousness creates. It doesn't even know itself because knowing requires the mechanism of awareness, which is already a manifestation within it. Imagine space becoming aware of itself for a moment, then forgetting its space. The awareness comes and goes, but space remains unaffected. Except this analogy fails because space still has the attribute of extension. What Nisargadatta pointed to has no attributes whatsoever, not even existence or non-existence as we understand these terms. Now, why does the mind resist this teaching so violently? Because consciousness is trying to understand something that is prior to consciousness itself. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The very instrument you're using to investigate, consciousness, is what needs to be transcended. This creates a profound paradox for meditation and self-inquiry. If you're practicing staying with the pure I am, watching how it appears fresh each morning, observing how it's the same regardless of what experiences arise within it, this is beautiful and necessary work. But Nisargadatta would push you beyond even this. He'd give instructions like this: stay with that pure beingness before it gets contaminated with any identity, any thought, any experience. But then notice what is aware of even this pure being. Don't try to grasp it with the mind. Don't try to experience it. Just recognize what you are that makes even the knowledge, I exist, possible. This isn't about achieving some special state. You can't experience the absolute because experience requires consciousness, and consciousness is what appears within the absolute. It's more like recognizing what you've always been, but which gets overlooked because you're fascinated by the play of consciousness. Many people hear this teaching and think it's pointing toward nihilism or emptiness. They imagine some kind of void or blank state. This completely misses the point. What Nisargadatta called the absolute isn't empty. It's so full that it contains all possibilities, including the possibility of consciousness itself. It's not nothing, it's no thing, meaning it's not limited to being any particular thing. When he spoke of immortality as freedom from the sensation of I am, he wasn't talking about becoming unconscious. He was pointing to what you are that doesn't come and go with states of consciousness. What you are that doesn't depend on the sense of being for its reality. What you are that is equally present whether consciousness is there or not. This teaching demolishes the comfortable spiritual identity of being pure consciousness or the self or universal awareness. These are still identities, still concepts, still within the realm of the known. The final dissolution isn't into some grand cosmic consciousness. It's the recognition that what you truly are was never born, never became conscious, and will never die. If you're feeling completely lost right now, that's actually a good sign. The mind's confusion when confronted with this teaching is like a wave trying to understand the ocean. The wave can know other waves, can experience the surface, can even recognize its essential wetness. But to know the ocean's depths, the wave must dissolve entirely, not into nothing, but into what it always was. This is why Nisargadatta called his teaching the final understanding. Not because it's the last thing you learn, but because it's the end of the learner entirely. What remains when even the I Am is seen through? That's what we'll explore as we go deeper into the most radical spiritual teaching ever given. The truth is that there is no difference between dream consciousness and waking consciousness, although they appear to be greatly different. All consciousness is one. When Nisargadatta spoke these words, he wasn't offering a poetic metaphor or spiritual platitude. He was describing the literal mechanics of your experience right now. What you're calling your waking life, this moment, reading these words, the sounds around you, the thoughts forming in your mind, all of it has the exact same ontological status as last night's dreams. Think about your most vivid dream from recent memory. In that dream, you had a body, you interacted with people, objects felt solid, emotions were real, time seemed to flow. The dream had a storyline, consequences mattered, and you were completely convinced of its reality while it was happening. Now here's what will disturb you. The mechanism creating that dream experience is identical to the mechanism creating what you call being awake right now. We've already seen how the observer is an illusion, how even the I Am consciousness must be transcended. But this teaching goes deeper. It reveals that the entire stage upon which these illusory identities perform is itself a mirage. The difference between dream and waking consciousness isn't qualitative, it's merely a matter of duration and consensus. In your nighttime dreams, you wake up and realize it was just a dream. But consider this, you've never actually awakened from the dream of waking consciousness. You've simply moved from one dream state to another, calling one sleep and the other reality. Nisargadatta saw through this fundamental confusion. He recognized that consciousness itself is the dream maker, continuously projecting the appearance of a solid, continuous world through a series of momentary flashes. Watch your experience carefully right now. What you call continuous awareness is actually a rapid succession of discrete moments of knowing, like frames in a movie creating the illusion of smooth motion. Each moment of consciousness arises, presents its content, and disappears, only to be replaced by the next moment. The sense of continuity, of being the same person who was here a moment ago, is a story consciousness tells itself. This understanding demolishes our most basic assumptions about what's real. Your relationships, your achievements, your fears, your plans, all of these exist within the dream of waking consciousness. They're no more or less real than the relationships and dramas that unfold in your sleeping dreams. The emotional investment you have in your life story is like a dream character taking their dream adventures seriously. But here's where most people resist violently. We've built our entire identity around the reality of our experiences. Our suffering feels real. Our love feels real. Our accomplishments matter to us. To hear that it's all dream stuff seems to invalidate everything we've worked for, everyone we've loved, every struggle we've endured. Nisargadatta anticipated this resistance. Treating everything as a dream brings freedom. As long as you give reality to dreams, you remain their slave. The key word here is treating. He's not asking you to become convinced intellectually that life is a dream. He's pointing to a practical approach that liberates you from the psychological heaviness that comes from taking the dream contents too seriously. Consider how differently you relate to your nighttime dreams once you wake up. Even if the dream contained terrifying scenarios or heartbreaking losses, you don't carry that emotional charge into your day. You recognize it was just a dream. The events had no lasting consequence because you understand their nature. Nisargadatta is suggesting the same relationship with waking experience. When you begin to see waking life as dreamlike, something remarkable happens. The fear that grips you when contemplating failure becomes workable. It's dream fear about dream failure. The anxiety about what others think of you reveals itself as dream anxiety about the opinions of dream characters. The limitations you've accepted as fixed realities show themselves to be dream limitations that can shift as easily as dream scenery. This doesn't lead to passivity or disconnection. In your nighttime dreams, you still navigate the dream landscape, interact with dream characters, and respond to dream situations. You don't become catatonic just because it's a dream. Similarly, recognizing the dreamlike nature of waking experience doesn't mean you stop engaging with life. You still work, love, create, and participate, but without the crushing weight of taking it all so seriously. The practical implications are profound. When you're arguing with someone, and remember, this is a dream conversation with a dream character, the emotional charge dissipates. You can engage more skillfully because you're not defending a dream identity or trying to control a dream outcome. The argument might still serve a purpose within the dream, but you're no longer enslaved by it. Here's a simple practice. Several times throughout your day, pause and ask yourself, how is this different from a dream? Look around at your environment. Notice the thoughts arising. Observe the emotions present. Can you find any qualitative difference between this and dream experience? Both involve consciousness presenting content. Both feel real while they're happening. Both involve identification with a character navigating scenarios. The liberating paradox is that you must use the dream to wake up from the dream. Consciousness, which creates the illusion, is also what recognizes the illusion. The very awareness reading these words is both the dreamer and what awakens from the dream. This is why Nisargadatta could say there's no difference between dream and waking consciousness. It's all the same awareness, playing different roles. Start practicing this perspective gently. When stress arises, remind yourself, this is dream stress. When joy comes, appreciate it as dream joy. When challenges appear, meet them as dream challenges. You'll discover that this approach doesn't diminish your capacity for appropriate response. It actually enhances it by removing the psychological friction that comes from over-identifying with dream content. The ultimate recognition is that even the one who realizes it's all a dream is part of the dream. There's no dreamer separate from the dream, no awakened person separate from the awakening. There's just this seamless display of consciousness, temporarily convinced of its own projections, occasionally recognizing its own nature, always perfectly whole regardless of what it appears to be experiencing. Here's something that might shock you. Nisargadatta Maharaj, one of the most revered spiritual teachers of the 20th century, spent much of his teaching career telling people to abandon their spiritual practices. This man, who drew seekers from around the world to his tiny Bombay apartment, had a radical message that goes against everything the modern spiritual marketplace wants to sell you. I did not follow any practice of breathing, meditation, or study of scriptures, he stated flatly. Whatever happened, I would return my attention to the sense of I am. That's it. No elaborate techniques, no years of disciplined sitting, no progressive stages of enlightenment, just a simple recognition of what was already present. But before you dismiss this as spiritual bypassing or laziness, understand what Nisargadatta was really pointing to. He wasn't anti-practice because he was against effort. He was revealing something far more profound about the nature of reality itself, and why our well-intentioned spiritual activities often become the very chains that bind us to the illusion we're trying to escape. Think about the fundamental paradox embedded in spiritual practice. You're using effort to reach effortlessness, using the mind to transcend the mind, using the sense of being someone to realize there's no one there. It's like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own shoelaces. The very structure of practice reinforces the illusion of separation between seeker and sought, between the one who practices and the goal to be achieved. Nisargadatta saw this clearly. Every time you sit down to meditate, you strengthen the identity of being a meditator. Every time you perform a spiritual technique, you reinforce the sense of being someone who needs to do something to get somewhere. The practices become another form of ego building, just dressed up in spiritual clothing. The mind creates the abyss, and the heart crosses it, he would say. But here's what he observed. Most spiritual practices keep you busy building better bridges across an abyss that doesn't actually exist. You become addicted to the sense of spiritual progress, collecting meditation experiences like trophies, measuring your advancement through states achieved and insights gained. I've watched this happen countless times. Someone starts meditating and initially experiences genuine shifts, perhaps moments of peace, clarity, or expanded awareness. But gradually, the practice becomes another project for the ego. They start identifying as spiritual people, comparing their progress to others, seeking more exotic techniques or teachers. The practice that once pointed beyond the self becomes another way the self perpetuates itself. Nisargadatta was particularly sharp about this trap. The real does not die. The unreal never lived. Once you know this, the fear of death is gone, and with it all other fears. You have realized yourself. Notice what he's saying here. Realization isn't the result of a process. It's not something you gradually achieve through accumulated practice. It's an explosion, as he put it, a sudden recognition of what was always already the case. This challenges everything we've been taught about spiritual development. We're conditioned to think in terms of linear progress, beginner to intermediate to advanced, more practice leading to better results. But Nisargadatta insisted that reality doesn't work this way. You can't practice your way into what you already are, any more than you can practice your way into having been born. The mind, however, is incredibly clever at co-opting even this understanding. It turns non-practice into another practice, effortlessness into another effort. Students would come to Nisargadatta asking for techniques to stop seeking, methods to achieve non-method. He would laugh at the absurdity while simultaneously feeling compassion for the bind they'd created. Understanding is all, he would emphasize. Not technique, not experience, not states of consciousness, understanding. But this isn't intellectual understanding, the kind you can accumulate and store. It's immediate recognition. Like suddenly seeing that what you thought was a snake was always just a rope. No amount of rope-seeing practice could have created that moment of recognition. This is where most spiritual teachings become forms of what Chogyam Trungpa called spiritual materialism, the ego's attempt to possess spirituality rather than be transformed by it. We collect meditation retreats, mystical experiences, and enlightenment concepts the same way we might collect cars or art. The seeking becomes another form of having, another way to build and maintain a spiritual identity. But here's what happens when you really hear what Nisargadatta was pointing to. Fear arises. If I don't meditate, won't I lose my progress? If I abandon my practices, won't I fall back into unconsciousness? This fear reveals how much we've made practices into security blankets, how much we've confused the pointing finger with the moon. Nisargadatta would address this fear directly. You are afraid of freedom. He understood that most people prefer the familiarity of seeking to the unknown territory of simply being. The practices give us something to do, somewhere to go, someone to be. Without them, we're left with what? This is the crucial transition he was inviting people to make, from doing to being, from practicing to recognizing. It's not about becoming anti-practice in a reactive way. Some people may find practices helpful initially, like training wheels on a bicycle. But eventually the training wheels have to come off, or they prevent you from actually riding. The I am that Nisargadatta pointed to isn't something you practice, it's something you recognize. It's not a state you achieve, but the very awareness in which all states appear and disappear. You can't meditate your way into being aware, any more than you can practice your way into existing. Both are simply and obviously already the case. When this recognition stabilizes, not through practice but through understanding, something remarkable happens. Every moment becomes a natural expression of that recognition. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because the artificial separation between spiritual and ordinary has dissolved. You're not maintaining awareness. You're simply no longer overlooking what was never actually absent. This is why Nisargadatta's role as a teacher was so unique. He wasn't giving people methods to follow, but pointing beyond all methods to what makes even the capacity for method possible. He was like someone pointing at the sun. Eventually, you have to stop looking at the finger and see the light that was illuminating everything all along. The pathless path isn't another spiritual technique to master. It's the recognition that you were never actually lost. My guru told me, trust me, I tell you, you are divine. Take it as the absolute truth. I did believe him and soon realized how wonderfully true and accurate were his words. When Nisargadatta Maharaj spoke these words, he was describing perhaps the most radical act of his entire spiritual journey. Not the years of meditation that followed, not the profound realizations, but this single moment of trust in his guru Siddharameshwar Maharaj's seemingly impossible instruction. Think about what was actually being asked here. A simple man working in his cigarette shop was told by another human being that he was divine. Not that he could become divine through years of practice, not that divinity was his ultimate potential, but that he was, right now, in this very moment, divine. The rational mind would immediately protest. Look at me. I have problems. I get angry. I worry about money. I age. I'll die. How can this be divine? Yet, Nisargadatta did something that goes against everything we've been conditioned to do in our skeptical, show me the evidence culture. He trusted. But here's what's crucial to understand. This wasn't blind faith or religious belief. This was something far more radical and intelligent. The instruction Siddharameshwar gave was devastatingly simple. Focus on the pure sense of being, the I am, without any qualifications. Not, I am a shopkeeper, not, I am a spiritual seeker, not, I am confused, just the bare, naked sense of existing, of being present and aware. That's it. No complex visualizations, no mantras, no elaborate philosophical frameworks. Just this. Now, why would such a simple instruction require this kind of radical trust? Because the mind immediately wants to complicate it, to add something to it, to make it into a doing rather than a recognizing. The mind says, that can't be it, there must be more. What am I supposed to feel? What should happen? How will I know if I'm doing it right? Nisargadatta's trust wasn't in a concept or belief system. It was trust in the validity of his own direct experience when he followed the instruction. He wasn't asked to believe that he was divine in the way he might believe a religious doctrine. He was asked to investigate the nature of his own being and trust what he found there, even when it contradicted everything his mind told him about himself. This creates an interesting paradox that perfectly illustrates why we've been looking in all the wrong places. We live in a culture that's deeply suspicious of authority, especially spiritual authority. We've seen too many gurus abuse their position. Too many people surrender their intelligence to charismatic leaders. So when we hear about the guru-disciple relationship, our modern minds immediately recoil. But what Nisargadatta experienced wasn't submission to external authority. It was being pointed back to his own most intimate authority, the authority of his own being. Siddharameshwar wasn't giving him something foreign or asking him to adopt beliefs that contradicted his experience. He was pointing to what was already most obviously present but completely overlooked. Here's where it gets really interesting. The trust that was required wasn't trust in Siddharameshwar as a person. It was trust in the instruction itself, trust enough to actually test it. It's like someone telling you that you've been looking everywhere for your glasses when they're sitting on top of your head. You could argue about whether that person is qualified to tell you about your glasses, or you could simply reach up and check. The genius of the instruction, focus on I am, is that it doesn't require you to believe anything. It only requires you to notice what's already happening. You already have the sense of being present, of existing. This isn't something you need to create or achieve. It's the most basic fact of your experience right now. But here's why most people miss it entirely. We're so focused on the contents of our experience, our thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, that we completely overlook the aware presence in which all of this is appearing. It's like being so fascinated by the movie that you forget about the screen. Nisargadatta often said, "The same water is in all wells. You just have to draw it from the one closest to you." What he meant was that this recognition of your true nature is available everywhere, through any authentic teaching, but you have to actually do the work of looking where you're being pointed. The trust he placed in his guru's instruction gradually transformed into direct knowing, but this transformation happened through investigation, not belief. Every time his mind would say, "This is ridiculous, I'm just an ordinary person," he would return to the instruction, focus on the pure sense of being. And every time he did this, he discovered that this sense of being was indeed completely ordinary, and simultaneously completely extraordinary. This is why the guru-disciple relationship, when it's authentic, is ultimately self-dissolving. The guru's job isn't to create dependency, but to point so clearly to what you already are that the relationship becomes unnecessary. Nisargadatta often told his visitors, "I have nothing to give you that you don't already have. I'm simply pointing to what you've overlooked." The practical aspect of this trust manifests very simply in daily life. When the mind creates stories about who you are, successful or unsuccessful, spiritual or unspiritual, enlightened or ignorant, you return to the bare sense of existing that underlies all these stories. When emotions arise, instead of getting lost in their content, You recognize the aware presence that remains unchanged whether emotions are present or absent. This isn't about suppressing thoughts or emotions. It's about recognizing what you are beyond all the changing contents of experience. The trust isn't in a belief system, but in your own capacity to recognize what's most intimate and obvious about your own being. What Nisargadatta discovered, and what his guru pointed him toward, was that the sense of being an individual person is itself an appearance within awareness, not what you fundamentally are. The I am that his guru directed him to investigate turned out to be the very awareness in which the sense of being a separate self appears and disappears. This recognition doesn't come through believing it conceptually. It comes through the radical trust to look where you're being pointed, again and again, until what you are becomes undeniably obvious. For the liberated one, the entire universe is their body. All life is their life. When Nisargadatta spoke these words, he wasn't describing some cosmic expansion of personal identity. He was pointing to something far more radical, the complete dissolution of the boundary between what you call yourself and what you call the world. Most spiritual teachings talk about unity as, if you're going to grow bigger, encompass more, become one with everything. But that's still the ego's dream of expansion. What Nisargadatta revealed is the opposite. There was never anyone separate to begin with. The universe doesn't become your body. You recognize that the sense of having a separate body was always a conceptual construction. Think about your direct experience right now. Where exactly does you end and the world begin? You might point to your skin, but that skin is known within consciousness. The room around you appears within the same awareness that knows your thoughts, the sounds, the sensations, the sense of space itself, all of it arising in the same undifferentiated knowing. Nisargadatta taught that the universe cannot exist without you, but not because you're cosmically important. It's because what you call you and what you call universe are both appearances within consciousness. Remove consciousness, and where is the universe? Where is anything? This teaching terrifies people. If the universe is just a concept, what happens to everyone we love? What about suffering, injustice, the things that matter? This is where most seekers either reject the teaching entirely or fall into spiritual bypassing, using it to avoid genuine engagement with life. But here's what's actually being pointed to. When you recognize that the external world is internal to consciousness, compassion doesn't disappear. It becomes authentic for the first time. When you are operating from the illusion of separation, your love was always contaminated with fear, possessiveness, the terror of loss. Now, seeing that there's no real separation, love flows without obstruction. Think of a city's electrical grid. When one bulb burns out, it doesn't damage the network. The power that illuminated that particular bulb continues flowing through thousands of other expressions. The bulb was never separate from the electricity. It was simply a temporary appearance of that same energy. This is how consciousness expresses itself through what we call individual lives. When a body dies, consciousness doesn't lose anything essential. What seemed separate was always just consciousness appearing as form, like waves appearing in water. The wave subsides, but the ocean remains untouched. Nisargadatta would often challenge visitors. Show me this external world you speak of. Where is it apart from your consciousness of it? The tree you see, the sounds you hear, the very sense of being in a physical location, all of it is known within awareness. Without consciousness, there is no experience of any world at all. This isn't solipsism, the idea that only your individual mind exists. That's still operating from the assumption of a separate self. What's being revealed is that consciousness itself is primary, and both individual minds and external world are appearances within it. The philosophical implications are staggering. If consciousness creates the appearance of space and time, what exists beyond these constructs? Nisargadatta called this the absolute, that which expresses itself as space to appear infinite, and as time to experience itself as timeless. It's the source playing both observer and observed, the eternal appearing as temporal. But how do you contemplate this without losing your mind? Start with what you can verify directly. Notice that everything you've ever experienced has appeared within consciousness. Your childhood memories, your dreams, your current perceptions, all known within the same awareness. Even the sense of being a body in space is a phenomenon arising in consciousness. This understanding transforms relationships completely. The person sitting across from you isn't a separate being you're trying to connect with. Their consciousness appearing as form, just like what you call yourself. The love you feel isn't moving between two separate entities. It's consciousness recognizing itself. This is why Nisargadatta could say that for the liberated one, all life is their life. Not because they've expanded to contain everything, but because the boundaries that seem to separate life into fragments are seen as conceptual. There was always only one life, appearing as many. The deepest liberation comes from recognizing that death is impossible. What you truly are was never born and cannot die. What seems to die was always just an appearance in consciousness, like a character in a dream. When you wake up, did the dream character really die, or was it simply recognized as never having been separate from the dreamer? Yet here's the beautiful paradox. We use this apparent universe, with all its seeming multiplicity and separation, to recognize what transcends all appearance. We use concepts to point beyond concepts, forms to indicate the formless, time to touch the timeless. The practices you abandoned, the guru's instruction you trusted, the very seeking that brought you to this understanding, all of it was consciousness appearing as the path back to itself, the wave using its own movement to recognize the ocean. When you truly grasp this, something extraordinary happens. The desperate search for enlightenment ends, not because you've found something, but because you've recognized what was never lost. The seeker dissolves, not into some blissful state, but into the ordinary miracle of what island. The universe doesn't disappear when you understand this. It reveals itself as consciousness playing in form. Every person, every experience, every moment becomes infinitely precious precisely because it's recognized as consciousness knowing itself through endless creativity. This is what Nisargadatta meant when he said the universe is the liberated one's body. Not ownership, but recognition. Not expansion, but the end of the illusion of limitation. The light you see outside arises from your own light. The light of the sun or moon cannot be compared to yours. When Nisargadatta spoke these words, he wasn't indulging in poetic metaphor or spiritual romanticism. He was pointing to something so immediate, so present in this very moment, that most people miss it entirely because they're looking for something exotic or mystical. What is this light he's talking about? It's not the photons hitting your retina or the electrical impulses firing in your brain. It's the very capacity for experience itself, the pure awareness that makes any experience possible. Right now, as you hear these words, something is aware of them. That something is what Nisargadatta called your light. Here's what's remarkable. This light has been present in every single moment of your life, yet you've probably never noticed it directly. When you were 5 years old playing in your backyard, this same light was there. When you felt your first heartbreak, when you experienced your greatest joy, when you were lost in deep sleep, this light was constant. It's the one element that has remained unchanged through every transformation of your body and mind. But here's where it gets fascinating. This light doesn't just illuminate pleasant experiences and avoid unpleasant ones. It shines equally on your worst nightmare and your most blissful moment. Think about this practically. When you're angry, something is aware of the anger. When you're peaceful, something is aware of the peace. That something, that aware presence, remains completely unaffected by what it illuminates. Nisargadatta used a simple analogy that cuts through all the confusion. Imagine a movie screen. Whether the screen is showing a romantic comedy or a horror film, the screen itself remains pristine white cloth. The images appear on it, play out their drama, and disappear, but they never stain the screen. Your consciousness works exactly the same way. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, entire life stories play across this light, but they never touch it. Most people make a crucial error here. They confuse the movie for the screen. They identify with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. You think you are the angry person, the worried person, the successful person, the struggling person. But these are just temporary images playing across your unchanging light. This confusion creates enormous suffering because you're trying to fix, improve, or protect something that's actually just a movie. It's like jumping into a film to save the hero from the villain. The whole drama is appearing in something that remains completely untouched by any of it. So how do you recognize this light directly? Nisargadatta gave very specific instructions, and they're surprisingly simple. Right now, notice that you're aware. Don't analyze what you're aware of, just notice the bare fact of awareness itself. That noticing, that aware presence, is your light. It has no color, no shape, no boundaries. It's not located in your head or your heart. It's simply island. The tricky part is that this light can't become an object of experience because it's what makes all objects possible. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can see everything else, but you can't make your seeing into something seen. Similarly, you can be aware of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, but you can't make awareness itself into just another thing you're aware of. This is why the seeking mind finds this teaching so frustrating. The mind wants to grasp, analyze, and possess this light. But the light is what's doing the grasping. It's like your hand trying to grab itself. The very effort defeats itself. Nisargadatta often said that touching this light, even for a moment, brings liberation. Why? Because in that moment of recognition, the entire story of being a separate individual struggling in a hostile world collapses. You realize you were never actually inside the movie. You were always the screen on which it appeared. But here's the paradox that drove many of his students crazy. This light is simultaneously the most personal thing about you and completely impersonal. It's your light. Nobody else can be aware through your awareness. Yet, it's the same light that shines in every conscious being. The sun in the sky is one sun, but it illuminates countless surfaces. Similarly, consciousness is one, but it appears to individuate through countless forms. This leads to one of Nisargadatta's most radical teachings. The I is present, even without the am. Most spiritual teachings focus on I am, the sense of being, of existing. But even deeper than the sense of being is pure subjectivity itself. Before you know that you are, something is present to potentially know. That pure I, not I am something or even I am just I, is what he called your original face. Living from this recognition transforms everything while changing nothing. You still have thoughts and emotions, you still interact with others, you still face practical challenges. But the desperate quality of experience dissolves. You're no longer trying to protect or improve a fictional character in a movie. Instead, you're resting as the light in which all experiences arise and dissolve. The beautiful irony is that this light you've been searching for in meditation retreats, spiritual books, and enlightenment experiences has been closer than your own breath every moment of your life. It's so ordinary, so present, so utterly simple that the seeking mind overlooks it completely while searching for something more impressive. The invitation isn't to achieve this light. It's already here. The invitation is to stop overlooking what has never been absent and can never be lost. In your original state, there is not even consciousness to be aware. As the Absolute, you are infinite and timeless. This statement from Nisargadatta stops most seekers dead in their tracks. We've followed the journey from person to witness, from witness to pure awareness, from awareness to the light of consciousness itself. But now we're being asked to go beyond even that luminous presence we discovered behind our eyes, beyond the very consciousness that seems so fundamental, so irreducible. What could possibly exist beyond consciousness? The mind recoils from this question because the mind exists within consciousness. It's like asking your shadow to describe what lies beyond light. Every thought, every concept, every spiritual realization you've ever had has occurred within the field of consciousness. So when Nisargadatta points to what preceded consciousness, what remains when consciousness itself dissolves, we're entering territory that cannot be mapped by any mental faculty. This isn't a blank void or empty nothingness. That would still be something consciousness could conceive. The absolute that Nisargadatta speaks of is infinite potential that doesn't know itself as anything at all. It's not unconscious in the way we understand unconsciousness, like deep sleep or anesthesia. It's prior to the very possibility of knowing or not knowing. Think of it this way. Before you were born, before your body formed, before the universe manifested, before time and space emerged, what was there? Not darkness, because darkness requires light to define it. Not silence, because silence needs sound as its opposite. Not emptiness, because emptiness implies space. What Nisargadatta calls the absolute is what remains when you strip away every possible attribute, quality, or characteristic, including existence and non-existence themselves. This teaching represents the final dissolution of all spiritual concepts, even the most refined ones. We began this journey by seeing through the illusion of being a separate person. We discovered ourselves as the witness of all experience. Then we recognized that even the witness was an appearance within pure awareness. We found the source of all experience in the light of consciousness itself. But now, in this ultimate teaching, even consciousness is seen as a temporary manifestation arising from something utterly beyond comprehension. The progression is complete. The person merges into the witness. The witness dissolves into awareness. Awareness recognizes itself as pure being, and even being resolves back into the absolute. Each stage feels like the ultimate truth until the next dissolution occurs. But this final recognition doesn't lead to another stage. There's nowhere else to go because you've arrived at what you've always been. Here's what makes this so difficult to grasp. You're not trying to become the absolute or achieve some state of absoluteness. Nisargadatta is pointing out that this is your true nature right now. The person you think you are, the consciousness you've discovered, the awareness you've recognized, all of these are temporary appearances of the absolute. You are the absolute appearing as a person who is discovering they are consciousness, who is recognizing they are awareness, who is realizing they are the absolute. This recognition doesn't lead to nihilism or meaninglessness, despite what the mind might fear. Instead, it reveals infinite fullness. When you recognize yourself as the source from which all experience arises, including the experience of consciousness itself, everything becomes precious, precisely because it's your own expression. Love doesn't disappear, it's recognized as your own nature appearing as the experience of love. Beauty isn't lost, it's seen as your own infinite creativity manifesting as beautiful forms. The fear of dissolution that arises when contemplating this teaching is natural. What happens to everything we cherish? What happens to relationships, to meaning, to the very sense of being alive? But this fear comes from still identifying with what appears rather than recognizing yourself as what makes all appearance possible. When you know yourself as the absolute, you don't lose anything. You recognize everything as your own expression. How do you contemplate something that cannot be known? Nisargadatta's approach is ruthlessly practical. Instead of trying to imagine the absolute, investigate what you are right now. What is it that knows you're conscious? What is it that's aware of awareness itself? Keep inquiring until you reach the point where there's no one left to inquire and nothing left to know. That's not a failure of the investigation, that's the answer. This understanding completely transforms the approach to spiritual practice. There's nothing to achieve because you're already what you're seeking. There's no state to attain because all states arise within what you are. Yet practice continues naturally, not as a means to an end, but as the spontaneous expression of what you are. Meditation happens not to reach the absolute, but as the absolute appearing as meditation. The compassion that arises from this recognition is unlike anything that comes from the person or even from consciousness. When you know yourself as the absolute, you see that every being, every experience, every moment of suffering and joy is your own appearance. The person in pain is the absolute appearing as pain. The seeker searching for truth is the absolute appearing as seeking. The sage who has realized their nature is the absolute appearing as realization. This creates a profound paradox in teaching. How do you teach what cannot be taught about what cannot be known? Nisargadatta resolved this by pointing out that the teacher, the teaching, and the student are all appearances of the same absolute. The teaching happens within you, as you, for the dissolution of the illusion that you're anything other than what you've always been. Yet there's something beautifully absurd about this whole enterprise. Here we are, using consciousness to understand what lies beyond consciousness, using concepts to point to what cannot be conceived, using the mind to recognize what the mind can never grasp. It's like trying to see your own eyes or lift yourself by your own bootstraps. Somehow, in the very impossibility of the task, something shifts. The seeker exhausts themselves in seeking and discovers they are what they sought. This recognition doesn't end life, it begins it. When you know yourself as the absolute, every moment becomes a celebration of your own infinite creativity. The morning coffee is the absolute tasting itself. The conversation with a friend is the absolute knowing itself through relationship. The moment of sadness is the absolute experiencing the full range of its own expression. Nothing is excluded because nothing exists outside of what you are. The spiritual search naturally ends not because you've found what you were looking for, but because you've recognized that what you were looking for was doing the looking. The seeker dissolves into what was always already present. Yet paradoxically, this ending is also a beginning, the beginning of life lived as the conscious expression of the Absolute, where every breath is a celebration of the mystery appearing as the ordinary miracle of being. If this final teaching resonates with something beyond your mind's ability to grasp, comment, "I understood it." The question everyone asks, after touching this understanding, is perhaps the most human one of all. Now what? How do I live with this? I Teng. You've glimpsed what Nisargadatta pointed to, that you're not the observer, not even the I Am, but something prior to all experience. Yet here you are, apparently still needing to pay bills, navigate relationships, and respond to a world that seems very real indeed. This isn't a philosophical problem to solve, it's the lived reality of integration. And here's where most spiritual teachings fail you completely. They give you the peak experience, the recognition, the moment of seeing through the illusion, then leave you stranded between worlds with nothing but platitudes about being present. Nisargadatta himself provides the most honest example of how this actually works in practice. After his teacher's words catalyzed his recognition, he didn't retreat to a cave or abandon his responsibilities. He returned to his tobacco shop. He continued supporting his family, engaging with customers, dealing with the mundane challenges of running a small business in Bombay. But something fundamental had shifted in how life was being lived through the apparent person called Nisargadatta. The key insight here is understanding the difference between detachment and dissociation. Most people, when they first taste this recognition, make a crucial error. They think spiritual realization means becoming emotionally flat, withdrawing from engagement, treating everything as just an illusion, in a way that actually creates more separation, not less. True understanding moves in the opposite direction entirely. When you recognize there's no separate self to protect, no individual identity to maintain, life becomes more intimate, not less. Emotions arise more purely because there's no story-making machinery constantly interpreting and defending. Relationships become more authentic because there's less filtering everything through the lens of, what does this mean about me? But let's address the practical challenges directly, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Take relationships, for instance. How do you engage lovingly with family members when you've seen through the entire framework of personal identity? The answer reveals itself naturally. You love more freely, not less, because there's no separate self calculating what it might lose or gain from loving. I've watched people struggle with this integration for years, and the most common mistake is trying to live from the absolute perspective in relative situations. Your spouse doesn't need you to remind them that they're not really the body-mind. They need you to take out the garbage and listen when they've had a difficult day. The understanding expresses itself through ordinary responsiveness, not through spiritual performance. Work presents another fascinating laboratory for integration. How do you engage meaningfully with career goals and professional responsibilities when you've recognized the fundamental emptiness of personal achievement? Again, the answer emerges organically. You engage fully because engagement is what's happening, not because a separate person needs to accomplish something. The quality of work often improves dramatically because there's less internal resistance, less energy wasted on workplace politics and ego protection. Decision-making transforms completely, though not in the way most people expect. There's no separate decider, correct, but decisions continue happening through the apparent person with remarkable clarity. Without the constant interference of personal agenda and fear-based calculation, choices align more naturally with what the situation actually calls for. It's less like making decisions and more like decisions making themselves through you. The compassion that emerges from this understanding isn't something you cultivate or practice. It's the natural fragrance of recognizing no fundamental separation between yourself and others. When someone is suffering, there's no sense of their suffering versus your compassion. Suffering is arising in consciousness, and response happens spontaneously, without the mediation of a helper identity. This creates one of the most beautiful paradoxes of integration. You care more deeply about everything, while simultaneously holding it all more lightly. You can be fully present to a friend's crisis without taking on their emotional state as your own. You can engage passionately with work projects while remaining unattached to outcomes. You can love completely while knowing that all forms are temporary expressions in consciousness. The relationship with suffering undergoes a profound transformation. Personal suffering doesn't disappear. The body still experiences pain, emotions still arise, challenging situations still occur, but there's a fundamental shift in how suffering is met. Instead of resistance creating additional layers of psychological pain on top of unavoidable life circumstances, there's a more direct, intimate relationship with whatever's arising. Universal suffering, the recognition that pain and difficulty are woven into the fabric of manifestation itself, becomes neither a problem to solve nor a tragedy to mourn. It's simply part of the play of consciousness, no different from joy or beauty or any other arising. This doesn't lead to callousness, but to a more sustainable form of engagement with the world's pain. For those drawn to share these insights with others, another layer of integration emerges. The teacher-student dynamic dissolves into something more organic. There's no one here who has something that others lack, no special knowledge to dispense. Instead, there might be a natural pointing toward what's already present, a kind of reminder rather than transmission. Most people aren't interested in these conversations, and that's perfectly appropriate. The understanding expresses itself through ordinary interactions: kindness with the grocery store clerk, patience in traffic, presence with children, rather than through spiritual discourse. The deepest teachings often happen in complete silence, through the quality of being that's present when someone has stopped defending a separate self. Integration is never complete in the sense of reaching a final state. The understanding continues deepening, but not through accumulation of more knowledge. Instead, it's a process of increasing simplicity, of the recognition becoming more effortless and natural. Doubt and questioning don't disappear. They become part of the ongoing refinement, the consciousness knowing itself more intimately. Even the approach to death transforms. When you've recognized what you truly are, death becomes simply another appearance in consciousness, no different from sleep or any other transition. This doesn't eliminate the natural biological drive for survival, but it removes the existential terror that comes from imagining yourself to be only the body-mind. The ultimate integration is recognizing that there was never anyone to integrate anything. Life lives itself through the apparent person with perfect intelligence, and your job isn't to manage this process but to stop interfering with it. The impossible becomes possible when you realize you were never separate from possibility itself. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."